Thank you, Creative Time, for an amazing summit. Property is as a problem. Property is a problem. The most historically sustained and violently reinforced idea of property has been established on the bodies, stolen lands, and labor of Black and Indigenous people. Property is organized through capitalist relations, positions all of us in relation to a set of racial hierarchies that constitute racial capital as we know it, live it, and experience it. Racial capital, social relations of power, means that our desires for radical transformation of how we might collectively live better together means that property has to be overthrown. Racial capitalism, social relations, devours everything in its way. Art, artists, and the discourses that legitimate them are also devoured by racial capitalism. And no matter how powerful the art, it is devoured without an apparent lack of appetite, and it does not even appear to produce heartburn or gas. Reparations. Reparations are all the rage these days. From the Caribbean to the USA to parts of Africa, the global call for reparations has not been louder than recently. The galvanizing call for reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, plantation slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and the destruction and plunder of African life might appear to be in full swing, given the attention that the Caribbean Reparations Committee has garnered worldwide, and, it's garnered worldwide, and the African American descendants of slavery, or ADOS, or foundational Americans, articulators of one version of reparations here in the US, have received. In both the US and Canada, and in both the US and Caribbean case, the calls for reparations have been a galvanizing force. And while everyday people pay close attention to reparations demands, the movement is largely led by what we can only characterize as elites in both societies. Indeed, universities, professors, and research units and think tanks have played a pivotal role in the contemporary movement for reparations. In each case, one sees a kind of quantifying of the past, economic value transformed into present-day financial numbers. And further, in the Caribbean, added to this arithmetized metrics is a call for a transfer of technologies and expertise. All of this is nonetheless rendered into a monetized figure of value. In other words, as property. Reparations call for a break from the past, but also for repair towards a different future. In my own thinking, I have gone back and forth on the importance of economic reparations, finally settling on the idea that one could take the money if offered. The positions of sober indifference to the notion that reparations dispensed within the context of ongoing rapacious capitalist white supremacy will not do the work that its most voracious articulators imagine it will or could do. To be clear then, I'm entirely pessimistic that even ambitious economized reparations programs and packages can work to transform the conditions of life for those of us who live most immediately with the effects of the afterlife of slavery and its manifold configurations of what a life actually is. So why do I keep coming back to reparations then? I come back because I'm concerned about the nature of the ongoing cultural trauma that Black people live with and live through. Too often in our contemporary conversations on reparations, the trauma is assumed to be healed by the potential economic repair. Therefore, it is not unfair to point out that in all of the instances that have garnered much attention, that reparations have largely turned into an economized program for repair. It is in part my argument that making the case for reparations as a form of economic repair is in many ways an easier problem to conceptualize and thus demand than making the case for reparations as a psychic and cultural set of circumstances for which economic concerns are but a small, though not insignificant, element of the demand. I argue that the question of value is always a double-edged concern, especially for Black people. In an essay, I argue that the reparations debate opens up the catastrophe that Black people emerge from and continue to live in. And while reparations offer an economic claim, it more significantly marks a cultural condition. Secondly, I argue that reparations reproduce the double edge of Black value, once as property, then non-value as emancipated labor, and now as a nation-state accounting measure in the demand for reparations. I ultimately conclude that Homo economicus cannot be a Black destination for freedom, regardless of our desires, or put another way, becoming property-only subjects do not make us free subjects. Reparations art. Art steps into the breach that is reparations, and thus the assertion of the property paradigm that orders our life. I have come to call some of the art that centers the cultural political frame of this moment reparations art. Not all reparations art is the same. Some reparations art means to participate in the undoing of racial capitalism. And other forms of reparations art replicates and live inside of racial capitalism, and thus art market capitalism in interestingly ambiguous ways. Given time constraints, I will be unable to offer a detailed analysis of the pieces of art displayed here. But if you think about the artists and the ways in which their art has been deployed, you can easily begin to think about which works fall on which side of the ledger of reparations art. Of course, none of these artists present their work as reparation art. It is my response to their work that provokes the phrase. What I mean to convey by it is that in the era of reparations, which is to say in the era of calls for a redistribution of property inside capitalist art, let me repeat that. What I mean to convey by it is that in the era of reparations, which is to say in the era of calls for a redistribution of property inside capitalism, art has something to say. Indeed, art might be ahead of the curve in refusing the capitalized, arithmetized logics of reparations. The end of property. In short, without the significant revision and indeed abolition of the idea of property, that which was once totally property, the Black slave, cannot now be made whole and other than property after emancipation through arithmetized reparations. The property relation continues to be a fundamental relation. The irony now is that an economized reparations demands property as the source to emancipate what was once property, but what also remains property at the ideological level. You see, we would have to believe that the property relations of Black life have changed so vastly since emancipation that the economic exchange for which our bodies was once foundational have transformed themselves. That is a fantasy that I cannot tarry with. The abolition of property requires a different ideological structure of our lives, a whole new way of living, whole new social forms of life. Economized and arithmetized reparations do not rip a tear in the property relations that makes anti-Blackness a structure of modern life and an interiorized function of what it means to live a life. No amount of money distributed can change the relation. So racial wealth gaps, technological transfers, and other material gestures only continue the structure of the relations of slave and master under another name. Another way to think and achieve freedom is to abolish property. Thank you, and free Palestine.